Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on unceded Musqueam territory. This land belongs to the native population. Every time we do any work of this sort on campus or in Vancouver, we do ask for permission and we also ask for their blessings to hold our events on their territories. So thank you, indigenous population, even though you're not here today. We were supposed to have two speakers from the Musqueam territory and from the Coast Salish territory, but they couldn't make it today. They will be here tomorrow, though. They wanted to give us their support and appreciation. Welcome. Our first speaker today is the president of the Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, the group that is hosting the conference at the University of British Columbia. Her name is Hanna Kawas, and she's second-year psychology and anthropology student. Please give her a warm welcome.
Marhaba. Can you hear me? Yeah, works. Okay. I'm not going to take too much time, but before I begin, I'd just like to also recognize that we are on unceded Musqueam territory. And I just wanted to welcome all of you on behalf of SPHR UBC. I know we are very excited to be hosting this conference here. And the only thing I really want to say to all the students here, it is very important for us to always learn about and utilize the spaces that we have available for us to advocate causes such as this. And so with that, I'm very happy that we've decided to utilize our spaces for this particular conference. So thank you very much for coming. And I'm very excited for the workshop. So I'll see you there. Thank you.
Our second speaker is very important. He's the one who called for the conference. And I remember the first email he sent the local community about 8 months ago. So when he sent us the email, I got really excited and I called him. And 90 minutes later, on a phone, and that included 2 naps, by the way, I finally figured out what the whole idea of the conference is. And I'm very, very happy and glad that I joined Khalid and Charlotte and the others in organizing this conference. Khalid is a longtime community member in Vancouver. He's also a leader in the society and a very, very prominent political activist. And he would like to give you a few words of welcome as well. So please welcome Khalid.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Really loud? Yes. I'm usually the person who likes to chant in demonstrations here in Vancouver, along with my brother Omar Shaban. We love chanting. Can you chant? Yes. Can you say, "Free, free Palestine"? Free, free Palestine. Free, free Palestine. Free, free Palestine. Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea. From the river to the sea. This is amazing. This is amazing to be here to see friends and comrades who I haven't seen for a very, very long time. And I too want to reaffirm that we are standing on an unceded Coast Salish territory. We thank the Musqueam Nation for giving us the permission to hold our convention on their land. We're very thankful and grateful to them. And Palestinians are looking forward to build and strengthening our relationship with indigenous struggle, not just in Canada, but all over the world. This is very important and central issues for Palestinians, because the very first lesson to be a Palestinian is to stand with justice anywhere in the world, and not just in Palestine. I see a friend, a long-time friend and comrade here, Rabab Abdel Hadi, and I want to acknowledge Rabab. I met Rabab 25 years ago in New York. She was distributing flyers in one of the Harlem, areas in Harlem, uptown Harlem. And Rabab was always, for me, a person and a leader and a comrade that I look up to. And seeing Rabab and many, many others like Rabab Palestinian women, the sisters and the brothers who have struggled for years here in North America. It gives us strength, and it shows that Palestinians don't give up and that we will continue this march for liberation and for return, because this is not a struggle that it started a year ago or 10 years ago. This is a very long struggle that our people are engaged in since Palestine falls under the colonization of the British, and after that, the settler colonialist project of Israel. So it's really important to realize that we're not starting from zero, and that we are starting from a very rich Palestinian experience here in North America and in Palestine in general. We remember the contributions of Edward Said, Martyr Alex Ouda, Samir Ouda, Ali Qasid, Ibrahim Abu Lughod, Nasir Aruri, and many, many others who have left their marks on our lives, and it is our duty and responsibility to continue the struggle and to take the struggle into another step forward. I have been asked many times, what is the difference between this conference and other Palestinian conferences? Why would someone travel hundreds of miles and thousands of miles to attend a conference? And I understand that you are very serious organizers and community organizers and activists, and you don't want to waste your time and energy, and you want to be able to use this time and a conference that, and meetings that will generate real progress. So we are looking for a conference where we can debate and discuss issues with mutual respect, because we are dealing with a very sensitive questions and very tough questions when we talk about Palestinian political representation, when we talk about legitimacy, when we talk about how to push our movement and reclaim the national liberation aspiration of our movement, when we try as Palestinians to look at these questions in depth, we see that we're different people. We don't have the same ideas about things, and this is very natural. In fact, this is healthy, is that people debate and discuss. No matter what is the issue at hand, it is important to discuss it and to also look for ways and spaces where we can build our common and united fronts as Palestinians who are living in North America. And I don't need to tell you how important it is to organize in this continent called North America. Here is where the power that feeds the occupation. Here is the states, whether Canada or the United States, that support the occupation financially, military. In every international and regional institution, you will find the Canadian representative fighting for Israel and trying to legitimize Israel crimes more than the Israeli representatives. You also see that in the Congress. You might see some of the members of the Knesset discussing and refusing some of the Israeli policies, but in the Congress, they're united more than the Knesset. So it is really important for us to confront Israel and Israel policies, but it is also important to see that this is part of confronting imperialist power, and particularly in the United States and Canada. We want to look forward, organizing our community here in North America and supporting our people back home and in the Shatat but we also want to look back a little bit. It is important to always look back and see how did we got here. The great Palestinian brilliant writer and novelist Martar Ghassan Kanafani, when he was trying to understand how did we reach here in 1967, he went and studied the revolution of 1936 and 1939 in Palestine. And he studied the Palestinian national movement and how events developed and folded in order to understand how did we get here. So it's important to look back and draw the lessons from our experiences as Palestinians, our collective experience, emphasize what's positive and just overcome what is negative and learn from that experience. I know some of our brothers and sisters, young activists, sometimes, and I respect them and I love them very much, but sometimes when I have discussions with them, I do see that lack of that depth in the historical sense of Palestine. What is Palestine and how, to understand the developments and the challenges that took place in the 70s, in the 80s. And it's not just enough to say the Palestinian leadership are sellouts or, the Arab regimes are this and that. And that's important. It's important to criticize the Palestinian leadership and the Arab regimes, but it's also important to understand how things really took place. The organizing committee of this conference, the local and the national organizing committee, will continue to do their tasks till the last minute. We will try our best to make you to create an environment where you can debate and discuss in a democratic and healthy environment, and that you express your positions and thoughts, and this is really a task that we will make sure that it will happen, but at the same time we urge you to do that with respect and tolerance to your brothers and sisters. We trust you and we count on you, and don't be deceived by numbers that conferences with thousands of people can do more than conferences with less numbers. Sometimes it's the other way around. Our community here in Vancouver is small in numbers, but believe me, we do big things. And we're very proud of our community because it's united. It has been supporting our conference. They provided everything we actually asked for. Our community was there for us, so I salute them and I thank them. Finally, I want to introduce the keynote speaker of tonight. And I didn't really prepare any introduction to introduce our keynote speaker because, he is very well known to us and to me, and we are very close brothers. But since day one, Hanna Kawas was there for us from the beginning, not just for this conference, but in our daily struggle. He is there, he is part of the struggle way before we got involved. He was one of the people who was truly voice of Palestine since mid-70s and before that. I was just seeing a picture of him demonstrating in 1975 right here in UBC, mobilizing for Palestine, being literally the host of Voice of Palestine for over 25 years, maybe longer than some of you are. So without further ado, please help me welcoming Hanna Kawas.
Good evening, and thank all of you for coming to this conference. And before I start, I want to show you something that I consider our visa and passport to this land. It's given by our native elder sisters to us after the AFN, the Assembly of First Nation, sent the delegation to Israel. So they felt so bad, they asked us to come and talk about what happened. So we went and explained the situation and the similarities between our struggle and their struggle, and they gave us this visa. I'm gonna start with what's the Canadian role in our disposition. It's not many people, even our young sisters and brothers here, know about how far the Canadian involvement was with the Zionist project. And, you know, I go back to the 20s with then Prime Minister Mackenzie King. Mackenzie King is the longest serving Prime Minister in Canada. I believe he served over 20 years on different periods from 1921 till 1948. And, you know, he was one of the first and few prime ministers, heads of state, to attend the Zionist conference. He attended the Zionist conference in Ottawa. And, you know, I'd like to quote some of what's written about him because it's important for us to know what are, or who and what our enemies are planning for us. He said he felt deeply, and I'm quoting this from a book about Canadian relation with the Zionist movement. And I say, this is a quote from the book, he felt deeply sympathetic with the Zionist aspiration, which were, he claimed, in consonance with the greatest ideals of Englishmen, quote unquote, Englishmen. Women don't count. I guess that's why he stayed single all his life. And he applauded Britain's effort in aid of the Zionist cause. He reassured the convention, that's the Zionist convention that was held in Ottawa on July 1922, July 4th, 1922. This was the date the Zionist Congress was held in Ottawa. He assured the convention that Britain would carry out its pledges to the Jews and do so in the big and generous manner in which he usually did things. He strongly endorsed the desire of, listen to that, the Hebrew people for their own homeland, where they might again make their contribution to the world literatures and civilization, and from which they might again shape, listen to that, shape the world's destinies. Typical anti-Semitism, you know, typical anti-Semitism, that the Jews shape world destinies. And again, you know, we can't really blame him because most of the supporters of the Zionist movement from the beginning were the anti-Semites and the very religious Zionist Christians who all through the history supported the Zionist project. That leads us to the other Zionist Christians who really played a major role in creating the State of Israel in 1947. Lester Pearson and Judge Rand. Lester Pearson was then the Undersecretary of State for Foreign Affairs. He became the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, and he became the Prime Minister of Canada. That's Lester Pearson. And it seems it's a license to become Prime Minister if you support the Zionist project. And he did, and he became Prime Minister after that. Lester Pearson and Judge Rand played a major role in creating the State of Israel. And I'm going to read from the Senate Committee. This is the Canadian Senate Committee of Foreign Affairs. They did a study, a report on Canada's relation with the countries of the Middle East and North Africa. And I'm quoting from their position paper. They said, Mr. Justice Ivan Rand, who played a central role in the formulation of the recommendation of its majority report. That's the UNSCOP. That's the committee that decided on the partition plan at the United Nations. With Mr. Pearson playing an active role in securing its passage, the resolution, basically 181, was passed. And I want to read you something, really, because not many people know that the Zionists were so grateful to Lester Pearson that they called him, and this is in this report also, they called him the Balfour of Canada. You know, so here you go. That's another aspect of Canadian foreign policy. And he was a Zionist Christian, by the way, who believed in the nonsense of the Torah and the Bible, and that God, I mean, not it's not the nonsense, it's the interpretation, or the nonsense interpretation of the Bible that the Zionist Christian interpreted. No offense to Christianity or any other religion. I come from Christian background, so I'm not really trying to, offend anybody. In 48 also, I don't know if people know that in 48 there were many volunteers, Canadian volunteers, who went and fought alongside Israel. Although this was against the Canadian law, because there was a Canadian law on the books. It's called the Foreign Enlistment Act. And it's basically was enacted in 1939 when there were volunteers from Canada who went to fight fascism in Spain. They enlisted that to stop the people, Canadian people, to go fight fascism in Spain. And I think this is still on the books, the Foreign Enlistment Act. But in 48, the Canadian government refused to enact this law and stop Zionist volunteers to go fight in Palestine. Also, for people information, in addition to the more than 300 Canadian eventually joined the Israeli forces, while tons of military equipment from Harvard training aircraft to radio sets were smuggled out of Canadian ports, smuggled under the eyes of the RCMP and the Canadian government. It's a joke. Anyway, so that's basically, I don't want to, I mean, the history of Canada is so intense in supporting the Zionist state. And, if you go look at their position paper from the Middle East, you see, number one, support of Israel, support of the security of Israel. Before anything else, that's number one on their foreign policy issue, and it's not new. Also, I don't think really, I cringe when I see people tell me, the liberals were more peacekeepers and more even-handed on the Palestinian issue. I literally cringe because all the examples I mentioned so far were from liberals. And I'll just mention two other examples from the liberals' era. The House of Commons in 1975, when the United Nations voted on equating Zionism with racism, the House of Commons, a day after the resolution, voted unanimously, not one single objection. All the MPs at that parliament voted unanimously to condemn the Zionism is racism resolution at the UN. All of them. I'll just give you another example also. And I have all this documented, so if people want to know more about these, I could read them for you. Another example of the double standard and hypocrisy, which really hurts us as Palestinians, not just only hurts us, but also it shows the unhuman, racist nature of the system that we are living under. On November 9th, 1982, Sabra and Shatila massacre, which happened in September 1982, could not elicit a unanimous expression from the House of Commons, that's our parliamentarians, of, and I quote from the resolution, "It's disgust for those forces that were responsible for their slaughter and urge upon them a policy of restraint so as to ensure that the innocent lives of men, women, children, and babies will not again be taken into either revenge or malice." You talk about terrorism. Opposing such a resolution is supporting terrorism. Canada all along supported terrorism. Even a massacre couldn't elicit a unanimous resolution at this House of Commons of ours here. Shame. So we come to the conservative era. Before the conservative era, it was difficult for us as a solidarity movement to expose what the native people call the forked tongue of the liberals. We used to have to spend lots of time from our movement to expose this double standard and hypocrisy, and they are actually supporting Zionism. We thank Harper for not wasting our time in exposing this, because they are doing the job for us, you know. I mean, Baird, you know, he addressed, by the way, Jewish National Fund in Ottawa. And either he is ignorant or he is, I don't know what. I don't want to say, but I'll let you judge. He addressed the dinner of the gala dinner of the Negev dinner. They call it the Negev dinner, the GNF annual Negev dinner in Ottawa. And I like to quote from a whole paper he wrote. And he called it, "Why Israel Holds Such a Special Place in My Heart." Why Israel holds such a special. But, you know, I'm fine. He explained why, but part of it, he says basically, which gets us to the focus of this evening's celebration, the importance role of the JNF, the importance role of this racist organization. And you know, to us Palestinians, we know what is the JNF. They stole our land, they kicked us out, they murdered us. This year they're celebrating here in Vancouver the Israeli Defense Forces at their dinner. This is the JNF. So, you know, nobody, Baird or any other politician can tell us that this is not racism. We know racism when we are under it. So he says, the importance role of the JNF, its contribution to the state of Israel are deeply connected to its rebirth. That's true. The JNF is unparalleled in its work, both in historical role it played in the creation of Israel and in the role it continues to play in bettering the quality of life within Israel. Listen to that. For all, the quality of life within Israel. For all, rural, urban Israelis alike. Jewish, Arab, and Christian alike. Jewish, Arab, and Christian alike. The JNF doesn't sell or lease even to Arabs, Christian or Muslim. There is no Christians there, separate category. He puts it as separate category, as if the Christians of the Holy Land are not Arabs. We are Arabs. As a person from Christian background, I'm telling you, Mr. Bird, I'm Arab before Islam came to the area. We had Arab tribes in the area, Arab Christian tribes in the area before Islam came to the area, and everybody knows that. So we are Arabs, whether you like it or not, and don't try to divide us. Divide and rule won't work, Mr. Bird. But the more outrageous thing is him lying, saying that the JNF benefits those people who the JNF say they can't lease or buy from the JNF. This is Bird for you. And the most important thing is just a week or two ago, he went to Jerusalem and met with Tzipi Livni in Jerusalem. It's the first unprecedented move any leader in the whole world took, because Jerusalem is recognized as an occupied territory. This Bird went and met with Tzipi Livni in East Jerusalem, which is internationally recognized even by Canada as an occupied territory. And, you know, he got away with it. We'll talk about that later. Why? Because our Arab regimes are collaborators. Our leadership in Ramallah are collaborators. Saeb Arakat squeaked a bit, but then he shut up after that. If you want to take a position, you tell them, take your diplomatic representation from Ramallah. All the Arab people would say, take your representation out of the Arab world, out of the Muslim world. What did we see? Nothing happened. And this is Jerusalem. And I don't want to quote Muzaffar al-Nuwab for what he said. Our Arab brothers and sisters would know the poem, what he told them about these Arab traitors. And the poem, by the way, was about Jerusalem. I just want to finish this, wrap it up a bit, because it's a big subject and people could find lots of resources for it, but I just want to mention a few examples. RSP, the retirement plan, the Canadian retirement plan, is investing in Israeli companies. There is two booklets, and both talk about the profiting from Israeli apartheid. The first one published, this is the second one published, follow up on that. And it's a huge amount. If I want to talk about it, we won't finish by the end of the conference talking about this subject. But profiting from Israeli apartheid, Canada Pension Plan investment in corporation supporting Israeli military police surveillance, prison industrial complex, part 1, part 2. In 2008, 2009, the aggression on Gaza, again, the same group, I mention it because you could get this online. It's called the quote, the Coalition to Oppose Arms Trade, quote. And I believe it's quote, I'll give you the exact, I have it here. Oops, I'm losing my papers. I think it's here, so I'll get it from you. Quote.ncf.ca. That's their website. The other one, as I said, in 2008, 2009, they have a study, Canadian military exports to Israel, aiding and abetting war crimes in Gaza, 2008, 2009. 50 Canadian military companies send military parts to Israel during this invasion. Just for your information. Also, I don't think many of you know that the RRSP, the Registered Retirement Saving Plan, the Canadian, you can invest it in Israeli bonds. Here you go. So that's the involvement of Canada, and I see people shaking their heads, but that's the reality we are facing here in Canada. They are supporting, aiding, abetting war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. And there is a book by Yves Engler at Outside, talks about Canada and Israel aiding and abetting apartheid. People could look at it. It's a quite valuable book. So I think I talked enough about Canada. It's really, I don't find pleasure doing that, but this is the reality, and this is where we are here. Harper threatened Abbas when they introduced the resolution at the United Nations, and he told him there will be consequences if they go ahead with the voting at the United Nations. To be frank with you, I think what happened is a play, is a whole play what happened. Abbas was losing face because of the recent attack on Gaza. Hamas emerged as the victor. Abbas got nothing from the Israeli, and he wasn't going to get anything from the Americans either. So they thought if the status quo stays like that, Abbas is going to be finished. And that's not good for the interest of the Israelis or the Americans, for that matter. So they did this play with Canadian participation, that, you insist on going to the United Nations, and we oppose you. You look good, the good guy, and your people will think, oh, there must be something. And this is all manufactured act, really. Because the US threatened, or pretended to threaten, that they're going to cut aid to the Palestinian Authority. Israel did do some kind of withholding taxes, Palestinian taxes from the Palestinian Authority. And the Canadian threatened, but none of them did what did they say. So what do you, I mean, do they think we are morons? I mean, it's clear that what they're doing is to play on our feelings and our emotions. Who would oppose a Palestinian state? We've been struggling for it for 65 years. No Palestinian would do that, and they know that. So they're playing on our emotions. And again, Harper threatening that, and by the way, all they contributed to the Palestinian Authority in 2007 was $300 million, mainly for the security services. I just like to give you some facts about that, because I think it's important to show what the Palestinian Authority is doing. And it's not really pretty, because they are not just betraying the martyrs' blood who died for struggling for Palestine, but they are betraying the Palestinian nation. In 2007, after Abbas kicked Hamas out of the government, the Canadian government pledged $300 million to the Palestinian Authority, and mainly for security training training in the West Bank, mainly in the West Bank. Maxime Bernier, who was the foreign minister of Canada in January 2008, we are doing that, providing aid to the PA, because we want Israel to be able to live in peace and security with its neighbors. That's what he said. And as I said, most of this aid goes to training the security forces. And by the way, the training of the security forces is under General Dayton, who is a U.S. general. And for people information, he has 18, they call them soldiers. I don't believe that. They call them 18 soldiers. No, they say 18 Canadian troops. 18 Canadian troops worked with 6 British and 10 US soldiers. Look at the terms. To what? To train the Palestinian security services. A soldier is training the Palestinian security services. I mean, does it make sense? A soldier doesn't train security. These are RCMP or military intelligence officers. A soldier, normal soldier, doesn't train. And listen to that. The US personnel have travel restrictions when operating in the West Bank, but our British and Canadian members do not. Calling them, that's Dayton, he's calling them, calling the Canadian and the British soldiers, his eyes and ears, Dayton said. These are his eyes and ears, you know, they're soldiers. You know, I mean, it's really a joke, you know. They think, again, we are stupid, you know. They are soldiers training soldiers, you know. And, you know, and again, I want to emphasize on the figure, 18 Canadian spies with 6 British and 10 American spies who are training these soldiers. And, you know, I'll just give you another fact about this mission. We don't provide anything to the Palestinians, noted Dayton. He's training them, but he doesn't provide anything to them, unless it has been thoroughly coordinated with the State of Israel and they agree to it. Listen to that still. Listen to that. That's what Dayton said. For instance, Israel's internal intelligence agency, the Shin Bet, vets all of the Palestinian recruits. Israel vets all the Palestinian recruits. Excuse me, do you think that these security services are really Palestinians who are looking for the interest of our liberation movement? No, they are traitors. Let's call a spade a spade. They are traitors, and they should be dealt with as such. And I urge you to make sure that they should be treated as traitors with their political leadership in Ramallah. Okay, the Arabs, they really, you know, when they reversed the resolution, they repealed the resolution at the United Nations equating Zionism with racism. I'm going to read you from the New York Times. It's not Palestinian propaganda piece, it's the New York Times, the mainstream US. The United Nations General Assembly, that's December 17, 1991. The United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly today to revoke the bitterly contested statement it approved in 1975 that said Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. This is the one I said that the House of Commons unanimously condemned it. If you remember, just a few minutes ago I said that. And I continue reading from the New York Times. The vote divided the Islamic and former non-aligned movement. By the way, the Soviet Union and their allies voted with the repeal of the thing, which was really a pity, because they didn't show they didn't hurt the Palestinian cause. They hurted themselves by doing that, because they showed their true face when they voted to repeal it. The vote divided the Islamic and former non-allied movement, while no Arab country voted to repeal. Listen to that. Bahrain, Egypt, Kuwait, Morocco, Oman, and Tunisia were absent from the vote. They didn't think it's important. They were absent from the vote. Okay. Algeria, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Pakistan. Pakistan is not an Arab country, but a Muslim country. Saudi Arabia, Syria, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen were among those voting against the repeal. They couldn't face their people, so they voted against it. But listen to that. That's what the New York Times said. But there was no indication that those Arabs voting against the repeal made much of an effort to persuade other states not to go along with the United States initiative. As you remember, they were just going out of the first Gulf War, and they were grateful to the US, so they didn't try to block what the US was doing. They didn't put any pressure, not political, not economic, not anything. And if they do, we know what happens, like what they did in '73, for example. But this is one example of Arab solidarity with the Palestinian people. There is another one, I think, which Alan Hart talked about it at a conference like this in London for the al-awda. He stated that in 1982, the Arabs met, just the heads of states, they met, and they told the US that whatever you do to the PLO, we're not going to raise a finger. Just do it. You want to finish them, finish them. And these are our brothers and sisters, supposedly, that did that in '81. And some reporter asked Ellen Hart, how did you know that? He said, Qaboos. We call him Caboose, like in English, Caboose, he's a real caboose. It's a nightmare in Arabic. Caboose is a nightmare. So Qaboos told Arafat that this is what happened, and you watch out. If you don't listen to us, that's what's going to happen to you. And Arafat told Alan Hart. By the way, Alan Hart, he was one of the bibliographer of Arafat. So that's how he knew that what they did in '82. And I have many other examples. One of them is Saudi Arabia supplied arms to Jordan in 1970, in Black September. Another example, Saudi Arabia supplied arms to the Phalangist Party in Lebanon when in '74, '75 to fight against the progressive forces and the Palestinian Liberation Movement. And, the list goes on and on. But more significantly, I'd like to talk about the arms sales of the US. All of us know what happened in 2008 in the US. There was this big collapse. And, without their arms sale, the US would have gone over the cliff. Who came to save them? Saudi Arabia. In 2011, and I'm reading from the New York Times, the United States tripled its 2011 to a record high. It tripled its weapons sale. 66.3 billion last year, that's 2011. 3/4 of the global arms market valued at $85.3 billion in 2011. Russia was a distant second with $4.8 billion. But more importantly, the main buyers of this arms were the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia by itself bought out of the $66.3 billion, bought $33.4 billion. Just Saudi Arabia. The Emirates, $4.5 billion, just the Emirates, as much as the whole Soviet Union sold, Russia sold that year. Also Reuters reported in 2012 about the sales in 2012. They said they expected the Americans, the US, to likely will go to the military sales, likely will go to $60 billion. This year total was swelled by record $29.4 billion sales to Saudi Arabia. Look at that. These are the Arabs who claim to support the Palestinian cause. All this money goes to the US and eventually goes to Israel to support its occupation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid in our homeland. And they call themselves Arabs. Shame. I think I gave you some examples of the thing, but I like really to conclude by emphasizing on what we are here for. I mean, the task is enormous. Our enemy is powerful, but it's not undefeatable. I think with our organization, with some sacrifice from all of us as Palestinians and as our supporters, we will win. I think the strategy to win is to organize, to be interested in supporting the cause with no sectarianism, with no individualism, with no self-interest, because this is what killed our revolution. This is what killed our struggle. We want to be selfless and emphasize on the positive and the resources of our people. We don't want Emirates money or Qatar money to support our struggle. They could keep their $400 million that they gave to Hamas and forget it. Just don't normalize relation with Israel, because normalizing relation with Israel is worth billions to Israel. So don't give us the money, just don't normalize and don't aid our enemy by buying weapons and buying their products. And the US is #1 enemy, but also the Arabs are the enemy from within. And as long as we have the enemy from within, we'll never succeed. We should fight that enemy. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic for many reasons, and I'll conclude with that later on. But I really want to quote something from Israel Shahat, because it relates to the Canadian government and to the lobby here, the Canadian lobby, because it's really strong, the lobby. CIJA is it used to be called, listen to that, they changed their name, by the way, CIJA, but they kept the same letters for it, CIJA. It used to be called Canadian Council for Israel and Jewish Advocacy, Jewish quote unquote. I repeat, Canadian Council for Israel and Jewish Advocacy. They thought this is too much, you know, I mean, it's not too neutral. It calls for advocacy for Israel, basically, it's clear. So they changed it recently, and they named it Center for Israel and Jewish something with an A, I forget. Anybody remembers? It's the new name. Jewish Affairs, that's it, Affairs, you're right. Jewish affairs. So they changed it into that, from advocacy to affairs, which has made it neutral. So it's clear, you know, that they are sensitive to their image, because they don't want to be looked that they are out of the loyalty to Canada, so they try to make it neutral. But you know, for your information, since they started in 2004, this CIJA allots just for advocacy, which is the real, what they're doing for Israel, allots for advocacy, they started with $10 million. Now it's 11 million for the last few years, being yearly $11 million. 1 million goes to the campuses. They hire 6 or 7, I'm not sure of the number, but 6 or 7 full-time representatives on campus that they paid to do their job. Is Omar paid?
Well, that's what I was asking.
Anybody of our people is paid? No. I mean, we put our effort and we not paid to do, because we believe in the cause. They are there as hired people to do their job, and they try to cover up their failures by blaming it on well-financed, either PLO, propaganda machine, or Palestinian propaganda, well-financed, and I don't know where we get this well-financing, but eventually they say it, so we want more money from you, CIJA. So that's the kind of work they do. And I think I have open secret here. This is, by the way, Open Secrets by Israel Shahak. And in the book, Edward Said introduced it. He said Shahak is a very brave man who should be honored for his services to humanity. He is one of the most remarkable individuals in the contemporary Middle East. So he wrote this in, I believe, September 1993, 20 years ago. And in it, he basically I copied it, but I can't find the copy, so I think I'm going to find it, because it's an important thing, because I respect Israel Shahak, and he was one of the few persons who used to translate the Hebrew press and send it all over the world, because what the Israel used to say in the Hebrew press was different than what they said in English and in other languages. So I thought I'm organized, but I wasn't as I should be. Oh. Okay, I might find it later. So I'll go ahead. I just want to again go back to our conclusion. And you know, the issue of organizing, as I said, is very important, and we should try to get out with even 4 points that we agree on. Right of return, equality, justice, you know, any major issue that deals with the Palestinian right to self-determination, you know, any major points that we feel is important. You know, similar to the BDS, although as I think the BDS is doing a great job, but it's not centralized. We need to centralize it. And it's important to centralize it because it's done haphazardly. We think it should be centralized. It should be, I mean, by centralizing, I don't mean we want orders from up. We should be a democratic body that decides what should be the focus on what. I don't want people to work in the US against Caterpillar and people in Canada works, you know, Jim Pattison or the another issue that we're dealing with locally. There should be local aspect, but we should centralize it. And by the way, the Zionists are really clever. You know what they're doing now to counter the BDS movement? What they're doing now, they're approaching most stores and they're dumping their products on them, at least one or two. So Canadian for Justice in the Middle East every week puts a new one. Give us a break. We want to buy. We want to eat. If you want to list all these stores, where are we going to go? You know? People will ask, where are we going to go? I mean, we need to focus on something or find alternatives. An idea is to find friendly stores, alternative stores to do the shopping from. That's a good idea, for example. As I said, Israel is dumping their products at cost or less than cost just to make sure that every major store carries an Israeli product to counter our efforts. And we've seen that in Canada. We've seen it. They didn't used to have many at many stores. Now they have it every store, you know, from Loblaws to Costco to this, to that, you know. I mean, and they're doing it just to abort our efforts. So I'll just, you know, I wish you all the success. And I think I found Israel Shahat. Allow me to read it. It was in front of my eyes. Curiously, he said in 1993, 20 years ago, he said, curiously, Canada represents a case where influence of its organized Jewish community upon the country's policies is even more palpable than in the US. That's Israel Shahat. The effect is that although Canada's interests in the Middle East are quite secondary, its dedication to Israel surpasses even that of the US. He went to say, Israelis are aware that the chauvinism and fanaticism of organized Jews in these two countries, the US and Canada, is supporting Israel exceeds by far the chauvinism of average Israeli Jew. Here you go. That's from Israel Shahat, and I said he's an authority of what's happening. Also, I'd like to conclude by quoting I've given the time up, so I conclude by saying that by quoting an Arab leader, I'm not sure if he's Palestinian, but he used to be the head of the Canadian Arab Friendship League when the partition vote happened at the United Nations, and as I told you, Pearson and Judge Rand were instrumental in passing it. He said that he called it an act of betrayal by the selfish interest of the so-called big nations, which broke, ignored, or forget their promises to the Arab people. M.S. Masoud, president of the League of the Canadian Arab Friendship League, the president of the Canadian Arab Friendship League, told Montreal Optimist Club that the Arab world would remember Lester B. Pearson, and Justice Rand, who did their utmost to impose upon Arabs the infamous partition scheme. He called it a scheme. And I call upon you to remember what Canada did, to remember what the US is doing, and to remember all those enemies of our nation, the Palestinian and Arab nation, and to make sure that they don't get away with murder. We should stand up for them, and we confront them. The right is ours, the land is ours, and we will win. And thank you all.
Thank you, Hanna. Before we split up to the workshops, which you're all looking forward to, I want to make two acknowledgements. The first one is to acknowledge UBC's commitment to academic freedom on campus. Since the beginning of our activism on campus, UBC has been very supportive, sometimes passively, sometimes actively. About 4 years ago, Carleton University decided to ban the poster with the Apache helicopter and the child. Similar requests were made at UBC, and UBC made it extremely clear that they have absolutely no intention to ban that poster. And they met with us and they said, poster as much as you want that year. The year after, similar attempts were there to ban Israeli Apartheid Week, and it was along the same time when the Canadian Coalition to Combat Anti-Semitism, led by Jason Kenney and Ignatieff and others, they wanted to ban Israeli Apartheid Week, and UBC, unlike many other universities, made it clear that they have absolutely no intention to do that. And this year, B'nai B'rith and many other Zionist organizations made tremendous efforts, not only to ban Layla Khalid's speech by Skype, but also to ban the entire conference. And we met with the university and they told us about that, and they made it clear that they have absolutely no intention to ban this conference or any other conferences we hold in the future, or any speakers we decide to host, whether by Skype or physically. The second acknowledgement is for invisible support that we didn't see immediately, and this is from the Canadian Association of University Teachers. And the university actually told us that they sent a letter to UBC complimenting them for respecting academic freedom and letting us hold a conference on campus. So thank you. So now it's workshops time. So we have 3 workshops. The first one, they can happen at the same time. The first one is current forms and conditions of Palestinian representation in the Shatat and homeland. Second one is organizing on Arab community front, implications for a struggle in North America. And the third one is between denunciation and self-criticism, histories, principles, and strategies. So please choose a workshop, and attend it, and please contribute to the discussion. Thank you.